So, as we get back to the normal grind, we have got so much to talk about. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. We took a little bit of a break over here, took a couple days off to enjoy time with friends and family, but fear not, we're back at it and we have got a ton to talk about because this weekend, being rivalry weekend, always provides fireworks. We got a little bit more fireworks than normal this weekend, and we need to break it down. We need to talk about some coaching moves, coaching hot seats. We need to talk about the AP poll absolutely blowing the newest rankings. We need to ask the question, will the College Football Playoff Committee get it right? We've got to talk about the games. We've got to talk about the news. And of course, we need to ask questions about the transfer portal. As you trickle on in here, be sure to hit the like button, drop into the comments, let me know what you're thinking about whatever topic you're interested in. This is one of the most, if not the most interactive college football show you will find around. We like to have a good time, but let's start it off with the AP poll and asking the question, will the committee get it right? Because yesterday this AP came out and it was awful. Let's go ahead and go through it. And I understand the AP poll has no foundation to what the college football playoff poll does, but I just found it odd. Let's go through this. At 1, you have Georgia. No disagreement here. 2, Michigan. Once again, no disagreement here. 3, Washington. 4, Florida State. You're not going to hear a peep from me for those top 4. I think that's all well and good. All of those teams have earned their place atop the top of college football. Here's where my contention begins. At 5, you have Oregon. I don't need to go through the whole song and dance. Oregon got a good win this weekend against Oregon State. Hats off to them. But that is only one of a few games they've played against an opponent that has any sort of a pulse this season. Now, granted, they looked real good against Oregon State. I'm not here to take anything away from the Ducks. They looked good against Oregon State. They beat Utah, but they did lose to Washington. And if we're talking about good losses, that is a good loss. But if we look at this list, we look at a team like Texas, who comes in at 7. They too have a loss in a rivalry game, which has to mean something. And they have big wins. You look at Alabama. Alabama has a good loss by the committee's metrics to Texas. Yet Texas and Alabama find themselves behind not only Oregon, but the real perplexing one, ladies and gentlemen, they find themselves behind Ohio State. Now, Oregon has perplexed me for weeks. We've talked about this. Up until the Oregon State game, the Oregon Ducks had only played 2 teams with a winning record all season. And I understand you can look good beating teams. If you go out there and play a team that is vastly inferior to you and you beat them by 50, hats off, because that's exactly what you should have done. And that's exactly what we've seen from Oregon. That's why I'm not trying to sit up here and take anything away from the Ducks. Let's give credit where it's due. They've gone out there and handled business. They've beaten up on teams that they should beat up on in the manner in which they should do it. And I do think that they have been a very, very good football team. In fact, I'll go as far as to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm going to be picking Oregon to beat Washington when they rematch. I do think Oregon's a good team. But resume has got to matter. Resume has got to matter. Because right now, college football, in my opinion, is so great because it puts something at the forefront, and that something is meritocracy. Or at least it attempts to put meritocracy at the forefront. So when we talk about Georgia, when we talk about Michigan, when we talk about those undefeated teams, your meritocracy speaks for itself. You haven't lost a game, therefore I have nothing to say. Nothing. But when I start looking at Oregon, I acknowledge you're a very good team. I acknowledge you're a dangerous team. I acknowledge that Dan Lanning is one of the best up-and-coming young coaches in all of college football. I think Oregon made a fantastic hire. He hit the ground running, and it does not look like they have dropped off 1 second from the Mario Cristobal regime. So listen, Oregon's a really good team, but their resume does not stack up to the likes of Texas, nor does it stack up to Alabama's. And furthermore, the real head scratcher to me, because at least with Oregon, I can say, well, you just beat your rival, Oregon State, a team that has been good. How in the world is Ohio State ranked above both Texas and Alabama? Now, I understand if we're saying, oh, well, they had a good loss. I don't disagree with you there. If you're going to lose to a top 10 team, if we're talking about good wins, good losses, which they do exist, we've talked about this uncomfortable fact, they do exist. Losing to your rival, that's a good loss by a losses metric. But ladies and gentlemen, you lost to your rival for the third time in a row in a season where you haven't exactly played the most fearsome of competition, and you lost to your rival where they didn't have their head coach. That has to mean something, no? This is a Michigan team that started off the year shrouded in chaos, is ending the year shrouded in chaos, and Ryan Day and Ohio State, which is devout of chaos, could not capitalize. And yet AP wants to tell all of us, the educated fan, that somehow Ohio State deserves to be ahead of Texas and ahead of Alabama. That doesn't make any sense to me. Respectfully to the AP poll, that absolutely makes no sense to me. Ohio State could not beat their rival when their rival is going through so much chaos, has all these investigations over their head, and their head football coach wasn't even on the sideline. And you still lost that game. And furthermore, when you listen to the Michigan players after the game, they were asking the Michigan players, were they more physical than you thought? And the Michigan players said, no, they weren't physical. They were soft. You had players saying that about their rival after the game. So you can't beat them when Jim Harbaugh's not there. I guess, Ryan Day, my question is, when are you going to beat them again? When is that going to happen? Because Marvin Harrison Jr., I understand there are reports saying that he might come back. I guess what will change? You couldn't beat Michigan when Harbaugh wasn't on the sideline coaching. You couldn't beat them when their head coach was suspended. And I think J.J. McCarthy is a very good college football player, but it's not exactly like Michigan is throwing the ball for 450 yards a game. You know what's coming towards you if you're playing them defensively. Now, knowing what's coming and stopping it, right? Two different things. But if you have an educated guess as to what's coming, it certainly increases your odds of being able to successfully stop it. So I disagree entirely with the AP poll. Once again, though, the AP poll absolutely doesn't matter. This is just what college football fans do. This is what we do. We talk about meaningless lists until the meaningful ones come out. Let's hit some comments. We have Sooner in Texas saying, morning time, morning. Sooner, Thomas, same to you. Hope you guys are having a good day. Snuff Torch says, I hope they put Texas in over Oregon if they both win. Snuffed, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this right here. If Texas and Oregon both win, I personally would put Texas in over Oregon. But Snuffed, I have been screaming from the mountainside, from this chair right here, that both Texas and Alabama absolutely deserve to be in front of Oregon. Not because Oregon is a bad team, but because we must reward teams who play a difficult schedule. And I understand if there's an Oregon fan in here, they may say to me, but Ty, you can't penalize Oregon for who they play on their schedule. You can't penalize them because maybe some teams didn't turn out being very good. And to that, I agree. We can't penalize Oregon for their opponents. But if we're giving that credence to Oregon, aren't we in some way, shape, or form penalizing Alabama and penalizing Texas for playing a more difficult schedule? I understand we cannot penalize Oregon, but if we're completely taking that off the table, the reverse of that is we are inherently penalizing Texas and we are inherently penalizing Alabama for the difficult schedule they have played. So it is an interesting conversation to have, which is why I keep having it. It's a fascinating one to have, in my opinion. And because of that, once again, you cannot penalize Oregon, but you must at least acknowledge what Alabama has gone through, what a Georgia has gone through. I mean, Georgia, we were all sitting up here at the beginning of the season talking about how their season was absolute cake. And during the early portions it really picked up steam towards the end of that season, especially with how good Missouri ended up being. They got a win over Missouri. They got a win over Ole Miss. Both of those are pretty darn good wins. So we'll see. But I agree, Torch. Thomas says, I'll say this, and don't hate me. You know I'm an OU guy. But if Bama and Texas are both one loss and Texas doesn't get in, it's a crime. Games have to matter. Listen, Thomas, I don't disagree at all. But here's the thing, right? Like, the committee has to do a balancing act of games mattering plus not being not having the season written in week 2. What I mean when I say that is, yes, games have to matter, but there's a balancing act that must occur. Now, ultimately, I am fascinated to see what they do here because the committee has had no sort of basis this entire weekend. He said, Sooner in Texas says, great weekend of football. Rivalry week was wild. Geez, tongue-tied already. It was amazing. Amazing, Sooner. Correction says morning time, morning corrections. Mark says hook 'em. Playoff committee never follows their own rules for tiebreakers. In fairness, Mark, I've seen the playoff committee say they have rules and then the next minute talk about the things they look for and they don't add up. So I don't think that there is any quote unquote guidelines for what the playoff committee is going to be going for. That's why whenever Thomas, you say like the balancing act, the only reason I bring that up is because that absolutely has been a thing in college football, this balancing act, right? And so that's why I say I have no idea. I have no idea. Bishop, big salute, Ty. Thank you for being in here, Bishop. And Jared says, roll Tide, my man, roll Tide. We have got to talk about that as well, which gets us into the weekend recap. Let's talk about the game of the week. Isn't it any surprise which game I'm going to pick? Is it any surprise at all what game I'm going to pick? Listen, there was a lot of great games this weekend. I'm not here to argue with any of that. But in my opinion, there was one game that quite simply rose above the rest, and that's the Iron Bowl. Ladies and gentlemen, last week before the Iron Bowl occurred, we were sitting up here having this conversation, and someone came to the stream and they stated to me that the Iron Bowl wasn't a rivalry. Now, I talk for a living. This is what I do. And for one of the first times, I was almost at a loss of words because the Iron Bowl isn't just a rivalry. It's without question, without argument, one of the 3 biggest rivalries in college football. Now, how you rank those 3, in my opinion, probably depends on where you live, right? I think some regionality comes into there where you're a fan of. But to me, the 3 biggest rivalries in college football every single year, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, OU, Alabama, Auburn, no particular order, and how I just listed that. But that's your 3 marquee rivalries, in my opinion. Now, are there fantastic rivalries outside of that? Of course. Of course. I think there are some amazing rivalries forming. I think there's some incredible rivalry games that provide incredible experiences every single year. But those 3 are different. The Red River Rivalry, the Iron Bowl, those 2 games are games where weird things occur. The type of things where all conventional wisdom goes out the door and you get a good old-fashioned slug match. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what we got this weekend out the Iron Bowl. What a game this was. There was a point where Auburn had pretty much well sewn this up. Alabama goes down there. They have it 1st and goal, and through a series of missteps, end up at 4th and 31. Now, granted, it's 4th and goal, but they have 31 yards to the end zone, and they end up with a huge touchdown. This Alabama team has had a resiliency that has been a ton of fun to watch, and it showed its head once again. Jalen Milroe talked about it after the fact. That this Alabama team has a resiliency that you just kind of have to strap in and expect. They're going to believe that they can go out there and win until that clock hits 0. Jalen Milroe said after the game, football isn't 1 quarter, it's not 2 quarters, it's not 3 quarters, it's a full 60 minutes, and we knew that we were going to use the full 60 minutes to win this game. And that's exactly what they did. In one of the most spectacular finishes we have seen this year. Clock running down, less than a minute left, 4th and 31, touchdown, Isaiah Bond. The Milroe Miracle. That's exactly what I'll be calling this for years, the Milroe Miracle. Because this was unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And this game is a game that's going to be talked about for multiple different reasons for a long time. If you watched the game, I probably don't need to tell you all the reasons. I mean, it was a wild experience from start to finish. But Alabama gets a big win. No, I'm interested in seeing what this means going forward. I'm interested in seeing how the team refocuses because Georgia's in front of them now, and this is an entirely different animal. In my opinion, this is going to be the best team Alabama will have faced all year. When we look, Georgia's offense is consistently clicking. Carson Beck is putting up huge numbers, and that defense, need I say more? It's coached by Kirby Smart. It is a offshoot of the Nick Saban defense. I think they're the most talented team Alabama has faced all year when we look at who they are fielding on that roster. And they're coached by that staff that has put together 2 national championship teams. And by the way, will be on an incredible winning streak when Alabama and them play. If Alabama is to down Georgia in the SEC championship game, they will have ended a 30-game winning streak, if I'm not mistaken. That's unbelievable. This week is going to provide us so much fun because this game is just a different type for Alabama. This Georgia team is just a different type of team. Now, luckily, I don't say that to insinuate that Alabama cannot get the job done. Alabama is a team that consistently has evolved all season. And in fact, if we look at it, Georgia played Auburn in a similar manner. Now, granted, it didn't take the last second heroic to end up winning the game for Georgia, but suffice to say, Auburn and Georgia was a very close game. Georgia actually won that game, if I'm not mistaken, on the 4th quarter with a Brock Bowers touchdown. So the margin of victory was only a few points different between what Georgia did against Auburn and what Alabama did against Auburn. Auburn, for whatever reason, shows up whenever an opponent comes to them. It's the wildest thing. And I actually knew when they lost to New Mexico State. If you were here last week, we were telling our jokes. We were having our fun. But at the end of it, I said, this is a double-edged sword. Because as easy as it is to sit up here and poke fun and hee ha ha, you lost to a 4-letter acronym team, which I absolutely did. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to shy away from that. I absolutely did. We also knew that it was an uncomfortable truth at the back end of that, which is that Hugh Freeze probably didn't even look at New Mexico State as an opponent. That Hugh Freeze and that Auburn team had probably been prepping for Alabama for weeks. And I think that that was the truth. I think that's exactly what we saw. So it's going to be a lot of fun moving forward, but in my opinion, game of the week, no question, it has got to be the Iron Bowl. The ending was sensational. The whole game is just shrouded in controversy. It had everything you would want. It looked at the beginning like Alabama was going to run away with that game. And then some odd things started happening, as odd things happen in the Iron Bowl. Ultimately, Alabama gets out with a huge, huge win. One of the things that I think is incredible, though, that Alabama is going to have to shore up is they have got to shore up their rush defense. Auburn was able to get a lot of successful plays. Now, here is something, though. Here is something. As we were talking about this game after the fact, I noticed that of Auburn's, I believe they had 300 and how many yards? 337 yards. Auburn's 337 yards, 169 of those yards came on 5 plays. So they were hyper successful in the big play. You take away those big plays, they had 168 yards. Now, that being said, you can't factor in all that. It's not that clean. You're not easily going to just take away big plays from a Hugh Freeze-led offense. He's an offensive coordinator who schematically is going to lull you to sleep and then get the big play by creating assumptions. He's going to make your linebackers assume one thing and take advantage of that incorrect assumption. So you're going to have a hard time stopping a Hugh Freeze offense, but at the same time, they have got to shore that up playing against Georgia because Georgia, they have the ability to throw the ball. Auburn had no ability to throw the ball at all. Thorne looked like a deer in headlights out there trying to throw the football. 5 of 16 for 91 yards. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Right? I mean, they had 1 big passing play, which netted him like half of his yards right there. So I have no idea what's going to happen in this next game. We're going to talk about it tomorrow night on the Bama Standard, but it is going to be a lot of fun. Let's hit some of these comments. I knew it was going to be a hard game, but I'm shocked just how good Auburn was and how hard they'd play. I thought Bama would win by 10 or so. I did too, Thomas. I did too. I talked about it. I gave my score prediction. I thought Alabama would win a bit more handily than they did, but also during the course of that game, you just kind of started rocking back and forth and being like, man, this is the Auburn that played Georgia. This is the Auburn that shows up and pulls their head out of their ass a week after they get just their butts whipped by some 4-letter acronym team from New Mexico. Truthfully, I thought the season was over. You should have been at my house, man. You should have been at my house. They're not inclusive enough. I thought Saban was going to catch a body on that offsides where Auburn had 3 people in motion at the snap. And that's another thing, man. The officiating in this game was awful. It was awful. Just terrible. But it is what it is. That kind of made it even more fun when the dust settled, that there was just so much controversy. Sent out a document from 2012 outlining its process for differentiating between teams with similar records and similar pedigrees, strength of schedule, head-to-head. The document reads, yeah, but Mark, they've strayed away from that document. So at this point, like, I hear you, but I'm not even sure why we would take anything they say at face value. Like, the committee is specifically proving they're not doing that. So I'm not going to be inclined to trust somebody that tells me, hey, I'm going to give you $100 on Tuesday, and 8 Tuesdays after they keep telling me that, they've never given me the $100. So you're not wrong, Mark. It does say that, but I have no inclination to believe anything they say, because at what point this season have they done that? And furthermore, even if we look back at past seasons, they've even strayed away from that. I have no idea what the committee will do. That's what they should do. You're 100% right, but I just don't know, man. I just don't know. It's going to be really interesting, but that's what listen, I completely agree with you. Yeah, that goes, no, we're in agreement, man. We're in agreement. We're in 100% agreement. I'm referencing back like to what you said. When I said you, it wasn't you specifically. It was like us, the majority of like college football. I don't know why people would have any bearing on what the committee says when they're not even following their own guidelines. I'd rather have the 12 computer decides than the clown committee. Honestly, man, I have no idea right now. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And if they put Ohio State ahead of Texas and Alabama tomorrow, I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to be very sad. I have no idea what I'll do. I'll just be sad. All right, let's talk about some of this coaching carousel, because the transfer portal is going to open up here very soon, and the coaching carousel is going to play a large part of that. In fact, we were looking at A&M as a place where we could see a lot of talent hit the transfer portal. We could see a lot of people get up out of there, and we just haven't seen that. We've seen a few names hit the transfer portal. There's rumor of a few more testing it, but A&M made their move. They get Mike Elko. And this right here is a move we talked about on stream multiple times. It would make sense. Now, here's my biggest question from this whole process for A&M. Why? Understand, I'm not asking why Mike Elko. Why? And when I mean why did the process go the way it did? You fired Jimbo Fisher, who created a massive buyout. A massive buyout. You fired him in a time where the transfer portal window would immediately open up and then coincide with the first transfer portal window. Whenever you did that, we talked about it here on the channel instantly. You have to have a plan. A&M had to have a plan together. And I believed they had a plan. Even when a hire wasn't announced instantly, I was like, I think that it's still easily logical and believable that they know who they're going to hire and that they just haven't announced it until after rivalry weekend is over. That seems logical. That seems very logical. But then it comes out that it's supposed to be Mark Stoops, and then it gets to the wire, and then Mark Stoops says no, and then it could be Ryan Day, and then it could be all these coaches, and then they settle on Elko. And I don't mean to say settle on Elko as if they quote-unquote settled on him. I mean settled on Elko. It's just that's where the pendulum stopped. So why Mike Elko? Well, Mike Elko has the experience in Texas A&M. He was just there, and he was a defensive coordinator that gave you really good defenses. Now, why Mike Elko in terms of the flip side of that? Your defense wasn't an issue. Even when Mike Elko left, the defense still excelled. And 2, the biggest question for Texas A&M will remain the biggest question. What are you going to do with the offense? Now, in fairness, Elko was able to put together a successful offense or a successful offensive staff over at Duke, especially when his quarterback was healthy. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to allow the staff to come together, and we'll talk about it then. But there are a few things I really like about this hire, and there are a few questions I have about this hire. This is an interesting one. One, Elko and Stoops. People revolted over Stoops, but are fine with Elko, and I don't think that either were a terrible option, but I just don't see one as one being worthy of like taking out the pitchforks and everything and stopping a hire, and the other in terms of rolling out the red carpet. To me, they're more or less different, very similar coaches. To me, more or less, they're very similar coaches. But 2, Elko was there when Jimbo was there, which means you just got rid of a coach in Jimbo Fisher that you said, we are going to give you all the resources of the world, and he still didn't get the job done. We still saw a culture that was awful at Texas A&M. Well, through part of it, Mike Elko was a part of that culture. I understand it didn't seep into Duke, but I think there's a conversation to be had about the Texas A&M culture in and of itself and how Jimbo Fisher and that staff exacerbated what was already a poor culture. Well, now you're putting one of those guys back into the driver's seat. I'm not saying it's not going to work. I'm just saying that was the first thing I thought. You just got somebody from the same regime of the guy you just said it's not working. Okay. I mean, fair. Elko's a good coach. Elko knows the area. But one of the reasons why I did like this hire is he has familiarity with the players. He has familiarity with some of the staff, i.e. Elijah Robinson, because I can promise you right now, every coach in the nation is hoping that whoever A&M hires, Mike Elko, does not retain Elijah Robinson. Now, I have no doubt that he will maintain Elijah Robinson because that guy is the catalyst to that Texas A&M team. If we're talking about the good at Texas A&M, in my opinion, we start at Elijah Robinson. In terms of coaches, that's where we start. So you got to keep him there. Mike Elko will understand the people that made a difference in the recruits' experience. A&M has assembled an incredible roster of talent. Elko understands which guys he can retain and keep building with and which guys it's not necessary to keep them retained. And I do find that to be a positive. So this is a really interesting move to me. I think that there's a lot positive in this. I think the positives are as follows. He has familiarity with the administration. So I already have questions about the culture of this administration, the culture of this program. At least Elko has familiarity with that. He just went to Duke, turned Duke around, did a great job there. He's been able to establish what seems to be a positive culture over there. Maybe he knows how to navigate the administration. Maybe his familiarity with the program grants him some sort of clairvoyance that Jimbo Fisher just didn't have because he didn't have that experience with those people. That is a real thought. 2, he understands the SEC landscape, which is a must. 3, he understands the current players and he understands some of the coaches. It allows him to, in theory, hit the ground running. Questions about the hire. He was a part of the regime that you just fired for being so problematic. And it wasn't a regime that didn't have a good defense. It always had a good defense, but it always had a problematic culture. And Mike Elko, even though he was great at Duke, he was a part of that problematic culture. Not him specifically. That's not my contention. Let me rephrase that. He was a part of the coaching staff that experienced a problematic culture. I think that's a more astute way to put it. The other way sounded like I was blaming Elko for the negative culture, and that certainly isn't the case. I think that the negative culture is inherently at Texas A&M, and it's up to somebody to fix it. Wasn't on Elko, but nonetheless, he was a part of a regime that did not fix it at all. Did not fix it at all. And 2, we're right back into the same boat of, okay, well, Texas A&M still has got to find a great offense. So I'm very interested to see what he puts together in terms of an offensive staff. But this move at Texas A&M is very, very interesting. I think the question I have for all of you, will we see an exodus to the portal? And I don't think we will. I'm not saying we won't see a few guys test the portal, but I don't think we're going to see this exodus that so many people thought, because I think if it was going to happen, it would have already happened. I think that would have already happened. They might lose a few guys, but I just don't think we're going to see this wave of dudes leaving that many anticipated. I think it would have already occurred. Now, that being said, maybe they were waiting on a name, and maybe this isn't a name that moves it for them. We're going to have to wait and see. Let's hit some comments and then continue on. Pate seems to think the fan base flexed against Stoops. Bedlam, that's what I was told. That's basically what I was told. That they had Stoops and that there was some discontent between some of the decision makers and the fan base, especially some very influential people. Now, I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm just telling you what I heard. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because a comment brought it up, right? I say this all the time to people. This isn't an insider show. I don't consider myself an insider. I'm an opinion piece. I might get some inside information. I've heard some very interesting things about a variety of teams, but I'm an opinion piece. I'm a fan, right? We come here as fans. I'm what I think you could call a fanalist, right? I think that'd be a very appropriate title to put on me. But Bedlam, suffice to say, I've heard the exact same thing. Doesn't make it true, but if he's heard it, if I've heard it, I like the odds. I like the odds. Yeah, and that goes back. Yeah. I'd rather have the compete. We talked about that. I don't care who OU hires next, as long as they run jet sweeps at least 20 times in a game. Hey, man, the jet sweep has its place. The jet sweep has its place. It's not a bad play. I grant you some of the usage of it was silly, but it's not a bad play. It has its use. Isn't Elko's back? It is. I don't know how anyone else feels. I like Mark Stoops as a move. I don't know why their fan base got so up in arms about it. Mark transformed Kentucky into a damn good team, and he did so while playing other really good teams, man. I mean, that Kentucky team, it was smack dab in the middle of the SEC. You had Florida, who I'm not saying is a superpower, but let's call it where it is. They fluctuated as a darn good team in college football for the past few years. They're really on kind of a down right now, but up until then, they were a solid team. Like, at worst, that's what you'd call Florida. Oh, they're a solid team. Are they going to win a national championship? No, not necessarily, but they're a solid football team. I think that's a fair way to describe the Florida Gators. They had to deal with that. They had to deal with Georgia, and Georgia is a great football team. We can easily put that title on them. No arguments. You know, that's a program that I agree with you, Thomas. I think Mark Stoops has done a phenomenal job, which is why I started this off by saying this isn't a shot at Elko. This isn't a shot at Stoops. Is Elko discernibly different from Mark Stoops? And when I ask that, is he so different that you would riot for one and roll out the red carpet for the other? I don't personally think so. And that's not to say that either one of them aren't deserving of the red carpet. I just don't see where one would be deserving of pitchforks while the other is deserving of the red carpet. I find them to be far more analogous than that. I'm nervous because I'm seeing all the Sooner commitments reaffirming their commitment, but I haven't seen Jackson Arnold. If I'm not mistaken, Richard, I think his father put something out. Don't quote me on that, but I seem to remember seeing something about his father putting something out. I wouldn't worry about that, man. I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't worry too heavily about that, because you have to remember this, right? Jackson Arnold, these quarterbacks, as much as like he might love Lebby, as much as he might want to play for Jeff Lebby and love his system, you also have to realize like what's going to put me in the best place to be successful. And right now, Oklahoma is just way further ahead in terms of their building phase than is Mississippi State. Mississippi State just went from an offensive-minded head coach, rest his soul, and Mike Leach, to Zach Arnett, who they didn't even give a year, fired him, and have now brought in another offensive-minded coach. Like, now Lebby has to undo everything Arnett just did, has to reinstall something. All these players that are there now, they're scrambled because this is their third scheme in as many years. That's a lot. That's a lot. Now, if Jackson Arnold came, he would certainly provide a spark to them because he would have that continuation of understanding the scheme. But you would have to ask the question, why would he go? OU is already building or built. In a lot of areas, OU is built. Mississippi State is building across the board. And in the areas where OU is building, they're really adding on. They're renovating. The structure is there, right? It's the difference of building a house from nothing and then taking a house that's got fantastic bones, just needs a little bit of a renovation, and you're in the renovating process. You're ahead of schedule. You're on schedule, even if you want to be as pessimistic as possible. Even the most pessimistic observers would say that Oklahoma's home renovation is on schedule. Personally, I think when we look at some of the leaps, they're ahead of schedule. But that's a renovation as opposed to looking over. Jackson Arnold would see a house that's just about done as opposed to a house that still has to be built. So, Richard, I wouldn't worry too much about that, my man. If it happens, I would be shocked because I think his dad said something. And I don't know. I would just be shocked for that move. It just would really be wild. I wonder if Elko will clean house. That lead to some recruits slipping. True, Mark. I think every coach in the nation, as I just said earlier, hopes he gets rid of Elijah Robinson. But I promise you what, if he got rid of Elijah Robinson, I think his days would be numbered from the start. That would be such a bad move. Arnold's dad said he ain't going. Okay, so someone else did see that as well. All right, well, I think that if multiple people saw that, then we're probably good there. Is Gabriel coming back? I don't know, Mark. I have no idea. I've heard some differentiating things, but we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. A&M is a lot of behind-the-scenes problems. Stoops might have dodged a bullet. All money ain't good money. And, Gerald, this is something we talked about because there is a really interesting conversation that was really reverberating around college football for the past few weeks. And it comes from, in my opinion, the best in the business, Josh Pate. I've said this before. Josh Pate, not only do I think he's the best in the business, but he is someone who, was really one of the first people in the industry to recognize me and actually give me a shout out on a platform. Just straight up tweeted about this show and that it was something people needed to watch. So not only do I think he's the best in the business, but that guy right there, and I look up to him in terms of someone to try and aspire to be. And just, he's a good dude. A super good dude, guys. Real good dude. Neither here nor there. He was talking about how A&M is one of the best jobs in college football. Now, rarely do Peyton and I disagree. Rarely do we disagree. Typically, our analysis is fairly in line. Even in times where we have been live at the exact same time, our analysis is usually fairly in line in some major topics. This is where we disagree, though. And understand this. If you see this, Josh, understand this. I don't disagree with your premise when you said, you've talked to agents and coaches and they view it as such. If agents and coaches are telling you that's what they view, ultimately this is a question in terms of not how fans view it, but in terms of how the decision makers and the people who would be put in that place would view it. And if they are telling you that's how they view it, then I have no argumentation. However, this is my debate background screaming, ladies and gentlemen, because whenever Pate stated that this was one of the best jobs in America, I said I would agree if we modified the premise. If we modified the premise to this is one of the best jobs with the highest capabilities in America. This has the capabilities to be the best job or a top 3 job, which is, I think, what it was put, that this was a top 3 job in the nation. I think it has the capabilities. But money alone has netted A&M nothing. And then the next question can be, well, what if they just hired better coaches? They have hired coaches that have had success elsewhere, that have won national championships elsewhere. Jimbo Fisher, Paul Bear Bryant. Now I understand the Paul Bear Bryant one is a little bit of a disingenuous argument because that was so long ago. Football has changed so much in so many different ways. It's a little bit squirrely whenever we go back that far. So if you want to toss that, you're not going to hear a peep from me. But even then, they've had other coaches that have had success elsewhere, and they do questionable moves. Like at a certain point, we have to ask the question, is it a lack of coaching, or is it something inherently off about the institution? Because if it was a top 3 job in the nation, then wouldn't a top 5 coach want to take that? Wouldn't a coach that is right there to breaking through want to take that opportunity and show everybody that he got the keys to a Ferrari that was already built? See, in my opinion, in order to be a top 3 job in the nation, not only do you have to have the capabilities to mobilize instantly, in terms of transfer portal, in terms of administration buy-in. The administration has got to be bought into the football program. Make no mistake here. This isn't just a football coach turning it around. This is a top-down approach. It has got to be total buy-in from the decision makers to the NIL to the transfer portal. All that has got to be ready to be mobilized. You've got to have the capabilities to mobilize a ton of capital. You also have to have a great culture, something that is ready to go, something that's just missing the right guy. When I look at A&M, I don't look at a place and say they're just missing the right guy. I think that's one of the problems with A&M. Don't get me wrong. But when I look at Texas A&M, my first thought is, you're missing some cultural aspects that need to be implemented. Until then, you're going to continue this vicious cycle you've been going on. And so I will agree with the premise if we modify our conversation. I do not agree that A&M is a top 3 job. I think it has the capabilities of being a top 3 job. And if you're saying that that's, an arbitrary distinction, is it? I can name you countries in the world that are sitting on vast resources. Oil, which is essentially gold. But their countries are not doing very well, right? Which then tells me the story that access to an abundance of resources isn't exactly access to success. Right? Just because you have resources doesn't mean you're going to inherently be successful. We can talk about college football teams that prove this to be true. We can talk about governments around the world that prove this to be true. Governments that have mass amounts of natural resources, oil, this, that, and the other. But there are other issues that prevent the maximization of the resources they have. And that to me is Texas A&M. Long-winded answer, Gerald, but yeah. His dad reached out to the media talking about Arnold. Gabriel, I think you're referring to. We're going to talk about USC today in a video, Bedlam. I'm hearing some interesting things about some moves they could go. There's been a lot of talk about Jim Leonard. I think that'd be a slam dunk hire. Anybody that gets him is going to be very lucky. Tom Allen is a name to watch. Zach Arnett is a really interesting name. We're going to do a video on that a little bit later, though, because it's going to be fun. I'm done with the 10-year college players. That's messed up. Morning, Shadow. Happy you're in here. Gabriel will not return, and Jackson Arnold's father says my son plays for OU regardless of Jeff Lebby leaving. Yeah. Okay, so that's a lot of people. Richard, no. Jay is curious about what the O coordinator will look like, but it's Luttrell, which would keep almost everyone. Yeah, I think Luttrell, it makes a lot of sense. I think that there are a lot of great options out there, but if you want instant continuation, Luttrell just makes so much sense. I truly thought Texas A&M would go after Traylor, you, me, both, but I'm very happy they didn't because I think he's a dude. I like Elko too, though. I do like Elko too, though. Like, I don't want to make it seem like I don't like. Have heard that Willie Corn might be in play because of the Clemson. No, 100% Willie Corn will be in play. Willie Corn will be in play. In my opinion, I think Brent will talk to several different people because you want to do a thorough job, right? This gets me back to something we talked about last season where everybody was saying, oh, what about this offensive coordinator for Alabama or this one? And I'd always say, like, well, Nick's going to do his interview process. He's going to interview all the candidates. And once all the interviews are done, that's when he'll make his decision. And I think Brent will take kind of a similar approach. He'll interview several guys, get a well-rounded view on things, and then make his decision. He seems to be very formulaic with what he's done thus far. All hail the Pirate. Absolutely, man. Rest in peace. Richard, keep wishing for Archie. He would never consider OU. Archie's not going anywhere, man. In fairness, Gerald, you had a top 5, top 10 offense in the nation. So offense, I mean, it was there. Some of your situational offense wasn't great. But the defense does need some strides, right? Like, I agree with you. The defense is trending in an upward trajectory. But they need some work. They definitely need some work. I don't disagree with you there, but I think that, and I don't disagree. Lebby had a lot of questionable sequences. No disagreement here, but he still put together a top 10 offense. He still, I think, scored the most points in the Big 12. OU was one of the highest scoring teams in the nation. They put together national streaks of scoring. So they were able to do some good stuff, some real good stuff. Situationally, though, completely agree. And situational football matters. That's huge. So yeah, little things, little tweaks. I haven't looked, but Drake Stoops is out of eligibility. I have no idea, man. Then Dozie decommitted. Oh, did he really? Interesting. Unlike the dynamic with Quinn Ewers returning to Texas and Arch Manning remaining in the program, it seems that Dylan Gabriel returns. I haven't heard that. David, I haven't heard anything like that, but I don't think either guy is going anywhere. Money gives people a say-so when they shouldn't. Money opens doors. People say money can't buy happiness, and that's true, but money can attain a lot of freedoms, and I find freedoms unlock a lot of happinesses when you're free from some of the stresses, right? I think that lends itself to happiness. Not that money in and of itself creates happiness, but money creates opportunities that create freedom. And in my opinion, freedom is where you find, or at least for me, right? Everybody's different. Freedom is where I find happiness. And being free. He's been rumored for weeks. Ty, what do you think about Willie Corn? Yeah, we talked about that a bit ago. I'm behind on comments, guys. I apologize. I'm going to go from the bottom and we'll go up. They just need an offense that can score a lot but have long drives to give there. Yeah, it's about having a symbiotic relationship, right? And like that's 100% true, Cordy. That's 100% true. It's about having an offense that's going to work with the defense. That's why I said it's not necessarily, that's why when I talked about it, I was like, oh, it's just little tweaks that it needs. It's not some like massive overhaul because the offense was good. It was very good. It was just, you needed to function with the defense a bit better. In terms of who to look for, I think Latrell would be a great option. He's got the connection to Oklahoma. He's got connections in the state of Texas. He has been in the building. He knows the players. If you could get Brennan Marion, I think that would be huge for recruiting. I think Brennan Marion is a name that coaches across the country are circling right now. And he's got a connection to Oklahoma through Tulsa. He's an interesting one with the go-go offense. He has the experience under Mike Leach. That'd be really interesting. Brennan Marion is another name where if you could get him, I'd love it. But I just don't know that you can get him. But if you can get him, go get him. A top 10 offense overall, but in 4 or 5 games, they were middling at best. Yeah, I think DG will probably follow, but I just haven't heard anything. Yeah. Yeah. Because if he goes, good luck getting and keeping any. Thomas, I think you can be fine. I'll say this. I don't know what it will change because, respectfully speaking, I think that if I was an opposing coach, right, and I was trying to negative recruit your tight ends, it wouldn't be difficult even with him on roster. I mean, I would go right up to your tight end and be like, hey, they're not having any production over there. You can go, but if everything stays as is, what for? I mean, they're not doing anything with the tight end. Come over here. We're doing this. We're doing that. Now, luckily, the way OU recruits is just different, right? You get guys bought in. But I just think that, yeah, I think that it's not going to be that big of a deal because the tight end production wasn't there. I think you can get another good tight end coach. And I do have to agree. And this is something I talked about. Tijuana, if I'm not mistaken, you were in here. We were talking about before the season. I thought getting Stogner was huge. And the reason I thought it is because I looked at that tight end room and I was like, yeesh, y'all need someone. Y'all got to have someone. And it ended up being Stogner. And I love Stogner. I love his story. He didn't have a great season, which begs the question, what were you going to use if it wasn't Stogner? I know that there were people in the space trying to say OU doesn't have a tight end problem before the season. Ooh. They didn't look like they had many options. It didn't look like they had many options at tight end. Mitchell is going to be a dude. That guy's going to be so talented. Devon Mitchell, Oklahoma fans, you need to be very, 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 very happy you have him. He's going to be very talented. I'm so excited to see him get to a college level. You got a great one. Absolutely got a great one. But that's why, Thomas, I listen, even if he's got a great relationship with him, I think it's easy for Oklahoma to say, hey, man, we know that he was a great guy. We loved him on staff, but we have a different vision for the offense. And in our vision for this offense, you are a main piece of it. That wasn't what we currently did, but we are going to massively up the reps for you. That would be my pitch. If players love him. Well, you did get Devon Mitchell. I mean, that's a guy that everybody wanted. But I do agree with the overall points about the production Tijuana. Right there, we are in agreement. And really, to be honest, I don't think Mitchell doesn't get talked about enough in our class, not going to lie. I agree, Eddie, especially, okay, yeah, no doubt. Give me a quick 45 seconds to really cook here, especially when we're sitting here. No doubt the defensive line is still probably the biggest need in the recruiting class because Oklahoma's defensive line has improved. They have improved tremendously. But you still see, like, in order for Brent to have what he wants to have defensively, you need more. That's not a shot. That's just saying you didn't have a whole lot when Brent got there. He's made massive gains in 1 year. More gains are to be had. Luckily, you've recruited the defensive line unbelievably. If you're asking me the biggest need in this recruiting class, it's got to be tight end. It's got to be tight end. Because the tight end position was so underutilized at Oklahoma, and it begs the question, was it because it just wasn't going to be schemed, or was it because they didn't have anybody? Either way, the answer to the question you want to have, it's got to be a different question whenever you get Devon Mitchell. You got to scheme for him. You got to get him involved. He's going to be a really big piece, in my opinion. Or you would want him to be a really big piece. I think he's a very important piece to this Oklahoma recruiting class. Now, this is interesting, Thomas. I was not under this impression. I think we'll have to see. But yeah. Caden Helms. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. We need that interior pressure so we can stop those slants that kill us. True. A competent tight end coach would bring in transfers and have. Listen, I think there's a conversation to be had, Tijuana, because if you have guys that are just injured, that's just unfortunate. But at the same time, I do agree with you about the production. I was worried about Oklahoma's tight end room, which is why I was leading the charge and saying, hey, it's great that y'all got Stogner. It's great that you got Stogner. And I know there were a lot of Oklahoma fans that came in the comments and said, it's not that great, Ty. It's not that great. Like, it's not going to really be anything. Well, ultimately, you were right, but in a roundabout way, so was I, because if you didn't have Stogner, I mean, you would have more issues than you currently did. So I do understand, like, being of the mindset that, hey, that position, we need a fundamental shift around that position, especially with Devon Mitchell coming in. You need to get that guy involved. You need to get that guy real involved. Let's talk about some of the coaches on the hot seat. Because Sam Pittman, that kind of got quelled. Why that got quelled, I'm not really sure. And I've said this before, I like Sam Pittman. I really like him. I really wanted him to work at Arkansas. I really want Arkansas to be good under Sam Pittman because it just feels right. It just feels right, doesn't it? He just feels like a coach at Arkansas where you're like, I want y'all to win 9 games a year, 10 games a year. I don't want you to beat my team, of course, but I want you to be very successful in all of your other endeavors, except when you're playing my favorite team, naturally. It just hasn't been that way, ladies and gentlemen. And Arkansas, I'm really interested to see what this offseason brings them. I am fascinated. To see what the offseason brings them. Because I think they're going to have to hit the transfer portal, and I think they're going to have to hit it very, very hard because they were a team that experienced a lot of loss to the transfer portal, and I think they could experience some more loss. They have some decisions to make. And so we're going to take Sam Pittman off the hot seat, but he is with someone else. He and Billy Napier, I would group together. Now, understand, I don't think Billy Napier is on the hot seat in the terms of I think he's going to be fired at the end of this year. I don't think so. But you're going to have a hard time convincing me that his job isn't on the line next season. If we're talking about coaches that have got to have a marketable improvement next season, I think Billy Napier leads that charge. I think he leads that charge. I think you could argue he leads it above Pittman because at least the Arkansas administration came out and backed Pittman. Now, granted, he's had a bit more time, but that is what it is. Mark says, Dion, no. I had Colorado winning 4 or 5 games. At best, I thought that maybe they could get 6. And I think they had an opportunity at 6, to be quite honest with you. I think that there was the Stanford game, right? They lost a few games real close. But it was a rebuild in every sense of the word. That's why I'd always fight back, Mark. And I mean, you were in here. I saw you fighting it too. When people would say, oh, they're going to playoffs. No, they're going to be much improved. They won 1 game. They're going to be much improved. They're going to be a lot more fun to watch. They're going to be a lot more talented. It's not a playoff team. You mean to tell me that roster against like Georgia, Texas, Bama, Ohio State, Michigan? There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But nothing that we didn't expect, to be quite frank. You know what I mean? Like, I think, Mark, to your point, the only people that are just like super disenfranchised about Coach Prime's first year are people that were either really tired of hearing about Coach Prime or people that really thought that they were going to come in there and win a national championship. But I think for your college football fan, your observant college football fan, they knew, oh, this year's going to be a lot of fun because they're going to have a ton of hype. They're going to lose games. They're going to win games. but it's going to be a ton of fun. And that's exactly what I had watching Colorado football this year. I had a ton of fun. They lost games. They won games. They lost some games closer than I thought they would. Hell, they played some teams better than I thought they would. They played some teams a lot worse than I thought they would, but it was fun. It was fun. Not that, I just don't think that 1 year. Now, granted, I know you're being facetious. I know it's a joke. But you're 100% right here, man. You're 100% right here. What he did for that school. Oh, God. Oh, God. Money. So not only did they improve, but they made a lot of money. Yeah, they're happy. They're happy as can be. Happy as can be. Aranda, the head coach, will call plays next season to prepare for his termination and hiring as the defensive coordinator in another Power 5 program. Aranda is an interesting name. Sanders didn't do it himself. Hey, man, listen. When you're bold in life, you're bound to have some checks that you can't cash when you're bold. But you got to be bold in life. And I respect it. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But I got to respect the overall. You got to be bold in life, man. Got to be bold in life. Because there's a lot of people you're inherently competing against. There's a lot of people that inherently are wishing you won't have that success. So you got to be bold. That would be wild. No, I think he means Lincoln. Please beat Georgia, and I want Texas to. Bama Georgia is going to be a movie. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a great game. Great game. Yeah, we're going to talk about USC, not OU. We're going to talk about USC in a video that'll be out later today. Yeah, we'll be back tonight, 5:30 Central Standard Time. We're going to go ahead and get out of here, guys. Been going for an hour. We're going to have some videos coming out throughout the day, so be on the lookout for that. Once again, 5:30 Central Standard Time. We're going to have the crew all together as we break down rivalry weekend. And a lot of hot takes going to be thrown around this evening, especially with the AP poll, especially with the coaching carousel, the transfer portal. We talked about it last week. We said we were going to sideline our transfer portal talk until this week and have tonight's show be the show. Well, it's here. So we'd love to see you 5:30 Central Standard Time right here. Can't wait to see you. Until then, have a good day. That's it. See you.